Loneliness is one of the more delicate subjects that we can talk about. Why? Because who wants to admit, who wants to talk about this feeling of being disconnected from other people? And it's that which we really address today in this face of grace that we see in Zacchaeus. Eugene Kennedy says that it's more difficult to talk about loneliness than it is religion or sex. And certainly, if you've been around folks who have felt a deep sense of loneliness, you know that that can, in fact, be true. The experience of loneliness is universal, though. Thomas Wolfe declared it this way. He says, "Loneliness, far from being a rare and curious phenomenon, peculiar to myself and to a few other solitary men, is the central inevitable fact of human experience." He's right, isn't he? We all deal with some level of loneliness, whether it's self-imposed or extracted from relationships that want to punish us by pulling back and hoping that our loneliness will in fact be painful to us. A couple of things you need to know about the passage we're looking at today, and that is that it's only found in Luke. It means likely that it was something that Luke, the physician, knew and experienced, and it was only him that knew about it personally, and so he wrote about it. If you've got your outline, you want to follow along, let's dive in. The smallness, first of all, of greed. Zacchaeus could easily have been the subject of David Roberts' description of what he called the solitary individual in his book, The Grandeur and Misery of Man. He says these types of people must make their lonely way amidst oppression without a comforter. How they strive to build a place of security by ambitious labor, and all they earn for their trouble is the envy of their neighbors. He says how they try to satisfy themselves with riches, and yet not all the gold in the world cannot compensate for the human relationships they've missed along the way. So that's the story, or that's kind of the backdrop of this man by the name of Zacchaeus. Let's read about him. Jesus entered Jericho, was passing through, and a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd, and so he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. So what does the smallness of greed look like? Well, Zacchaeus suffered from the smallness of greed because he had a shrinking heart. Now, how did he do that? How did that happen? It just didn't happen overnight. One of the other things you notice about this, not only is it a story found only in Luke, but never in Scripture or in really any Greek literature that we're aware of, is the word chief put in the front of tax collector. So if it's put in the front here, it means that there was some serious chief in him. He may well have liked the role, or even if he didn't like it, he liked money enough that he was going to extract pain on people in order to get the money. So how did that happen? How did he extract the pain? Well, have you seen McDonald's or Arby's or Gold Star? Those restaurants are franchises. What does that mean? It means that they have a franchise or a license to sell a certain product for the owner's company. It's a kind of an umbrella over all these other franchises. Well, the Romans had moved into town, and here was this Jewish man who was living among his neighbors and friends, who was now being called the chief tax collector because he was good at what he did. And that means he had a franchise. He had a franchise to collect money from the people in his community. And the way that he made his money, well, in the franchises that I know about, they regulate what you can charge. Well, the Romans could care less what you charge as long as they got what they wanted coming to them. And so evidently he was chief because he knew how to extract money from folks. And I will tell you, I don't doubt a bit that he was called a turncoat Jew because he had the smallness of greed playing out in his life. But also, Zacchaeus suffered not only from a shrinking heart, but loneliness can be the price of success. And because of that turncoat Jew and all that he was, I suspect loneliness set on him and had a major fact in his life. I wonder If it's somewhere along the way when he started living the life of being a wealthy person, if he didn't realize, wait a minute, I'm very, very lonesome. What I thought might bring me wealth and friendship that I could perhaps even influence through purchasing their friendship has now, in fact, brought me significant loneliness. Someone has said nothing succeeds like excess. Well, the problem with that is they were wrong, because let me show you 3 pictures. You will know at least 2 of them, I think. Let's look at the first one. I think everybody knows who that is, right? Michael Jackson. How about the other picture? Everybody knows the King. Somebody said the King this morning. How about this one? Anybody know this one? Anybody? Howard Hughes is right. Multi-billionaire. He took his inheritance and did incredibly well. What's the common theme of all those? Well, the rich and the famous turn out to be really, really lonely sometimes. I would encourage you, go Google strangeness of Elvis sometime. I did the other day. Elvis was a strange bird. Let me just tell you. He had an obsession with lots of things, but one of them was with being a law officer. And he even got a relationship with Nixon. Just look at some of the strange stuff that Elvis did, and you will understand. And, of course, Michael and you can't get any stranger than how Howard Hughes ended his life. How he lived the last part of his life as a recluse and a hypochondriac, where he wouldn't get near anybody because of the fear of getting germs. There's movies been written about that if you haven't seen them. But when you have a shrinking heart and you choose to live a lifestyle that isolates you more than encourages you to be with other people, then that loneliness will, in fact, live in your life in a powerful way. So he suffers from a shrinking heart, and the price of his success is loneliness. But also, thirdly, desire can diminish or it can replenish us. Which one's it going to do? The word diminish means to detract from the authority, honor, stature, or reputation of. In other words, does something that you have bring goodness to your life, or does it diminish that sense of goodness? Measure that against relationships that you have. Measure that against your job. Measure that against your family. And the fact is, there are some things that just diminish our lives, and there are some things that replenish our lives. And our hope is, and we can't have all the things, simply isolate ourselves and have just the people in our lives that replenish us, but we certainly can make some choices to help us with that. But what matters ultimately to help us make that choice is what we do with our desire. What is it that drives us? And so I did a little research this week on desire. Desire is a sense of longing or hoping of a person, object, or outcome. In other words, when you look at desire, desire is not good or bad in and of itself. It's what you do, and it is what drives that desire that makes it valuable. Think about it. If you have a desire for knowledge, you can become so knowledgeable and what we call nerdy that nobody, wants to be around you because you're always thinking and analyzing things and going beyond. I've been called nerd before. The desire to help others. You can be so obsessed with helping others that you leave yourself unattended to. The desire is not bad. It's what drives it. And in many cases, what drives a good desire to be a bad desire is the ego that is behind it. And I would say to you, if you're wondering about a desire that you have in your life, is this a good desire or a bad desire? Ambitious, ambition, again, is one of those neutral things. There's nothing wrong with ambition, but what do you do with your ambition? And what is it that drives your ambition? Too many people use their desire or their ambition to accept a lifestyle, to succeed at any cost, or in many cases, a desire for sexual fulfillment, which becomes predatory in some people's lives, or even pursued for self-interest only. And when those kinds of things happen around our desires, and again, I would say to you, you want to know how to measure your desire, see where your ego is playing at the core of that, and you'll find out if it's a good one or a bad one. So, spiritually speaking, how do we become people with shrinking hearts, small people spiritually, we become that by desiring the wrong things for the wrong reasons. Inappropriate desire diminishes our soul. It was H.G. Wells in his book on Jesus called The Outline of History. At the end of that, his final comment on Jesus is this: the Galilean has been too great for our small hearts. And I will tell you, on a regular occasion, when I get into God's Word and I read and I'm praying, and God's heart's just bigger than mine. And I'm challenged by that. And I'm hopefully encouraged because He allows me to join, through His grace, to join Him. So first of all, there's the smallness of greed, and then there's the largeness of grace. Nowhere in the largeness of grace, the extreme nature of God's love, do we see it more clearly than what we see in Zacchaeus' encounter with Jesus. In this episode in the ministry of Jesus, we see the miracle of acceptance. Now, we often don't think of acceptance as a miracle unless you've been needing to accept another person, or you've needed acceptance in a situation. Look at Scripture. When Jesus reached the spot, He looked up and He said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once, and He welcomed him gladly. And the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Now, this is not simply a nice little story to be told about Jesus. This story is a strategy for the church in the local communities that we live in. Because what it is saying is that we start with the premise of acceptance for other people. How do we do that? Well, Jesus, first of all, was a friend of sinners. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you and I got in trouble for being friends? In particular, friends with the wrong people? According to Luke, Jesus initiated the encounter with Zacchaeus. And Paul Scheer, a famous preacher from a former century, said, "The human story is not so much concerned with man's search for God as God's search for man." And when you think about it, the beauty of my transition and my conversion happened when I didn't suddenly start believing in God. I'd always believed in God. I always had a kind of formulation of what I thought God was like, but I never knew that it was personal. And I never connected the dots of it being personal. And in the connecting of the dots being personal came the realization that it was not simply God away up there, but God down here seeking me. And once I found out the fact that God was in fact seeking my relationship, seeking me, that's when my life began to turn around. So let me ask you the question. It's a question that was in the Bible study that I gave to my class this morning, and that is, do you have a person in your life who you would not consider, quote, a friend, or at least a friend that you enjoy being around? You know, I have friends that, they're much better friends at a distance. Do you all have any of those? I mean, you know, we have some friends that, I like them, but the farther away they are, that's better. And we have those. I know that. I understand that. But what is it that we could do this week to be a friend to those distant people? What would it look like? Jesus was a friend of sinners, and He offered them acceptance as the core of grace. Secondly, acceptance is the core of grace. Now, let me first say, our acceptance of somebody else does not mean that they control us, or that we are saying to them, "You're right." My acceptance of many people is not based upon my belief that everything is right for them or for me. Or does it control who I am when I'm with that person? Let's give an example. I do weddings. I see a couple. I'm going to be doing their wedding here before long. Had another couple in the first service. I do weddings all the time, regularly, but every wedding comes with its own set of issues and complications. And if I have pastor friends who will not they have a list of rules of people they will not marry. And I guess the only person this pastor will marry is Jesus and his girlfriend. I mean, there's nobody that will measure up. I mean, when you have those kind of guidelines, I mean, you can't have been married before. I mean, you can't, and it goes through all this list of things, and I'm thinking, holy smokes, who does he marry? Yeah, because it's such a long list. I mean, I'd like to be that pure, but I'm not, and so And how about doing funerals? I do funerals for people I do not know. Why? Because my premise is I enter the room accepting people, not approving and not saying everything they did or lived was right, but I enter the room accepting people. Why? Because change happens when we are accepted before we are changed. If I tell you, you all need to clean up your act, or you need to get better, you need to get it together, then I will accept you, and then I will marry you, or whatever it is I do with you or for you. It's going to be a long, long time, isn't it? I mean, what if when I came here as a young 18-year-old young man, and woolly hair, I had black hair all over and big beard, and just I was in the 70s, man, and I was just kind of hanging out. And what if I'd come here and the church had said, man, you need to get it together, time out, look in the mirror, and when you come back, when you get your life. If they had thought that, I would have been long gone. I mean, I'm sure there were occasions when I walked by and somebody rolled their eyes and said, oh my goodness, Lord needs to help this young man. And fortunately, they gave me the room and the time to where the Lord, in fact, was able to do that. But acceptance does not mean that you approve of the person, but there is, in fact, a miracle of acceptance that can work when you have those difficult relationships. You can accept and you need not approve, and that's a powerful thing. But how do we do that? Thirdly, grace is the strategy of God's plan. It's the strategy. Grace, oh my goodness, what a wonderful thing grace is. Grace is not this free meal ticket. Grace does not mean if I'm offering grace to somebody that I'm going to give them whatever they need. I had several phone calls on my voicemail this morning when I came in, because I only got in late yesterday, and those messages, half of those messages in there are people that need something, and I will call them. I'll return the calls, and we'll see what we can do. But the fact is, my acceptance of them does not mean that I have to approve of what they want for my house. Now, the other thing, what they want for my life, the other thing I want to mention here is that Jesus came to Zacchaeus' house. Now, make note of that. I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit of a private guy. So if I had encountered Jesus and Jesus said, hey, let's go to my house, I'd say, hey, I'm cool with that. But if Jesus says to me, hey, let's go to your house, whoa, wait just a minute. What do you want to go to my house for? I mean, my little judgmental stick would go up and say, wait a minute, are you going to be looking at my house? Are you going to be judging me? But when you turn it around, you think about it. Wait a minute, he wants to come into your backyard and be with you and accept you. And that's a powerful thing when you think about it. When you think about it, let me give you a $3 word, the word incarnation. The word incarnation we theologians throw around because incarnation means that God became man. And that's the incarnation, that God became man in Jesus. That's a great word when you think of it like that. But if you want the down and dirty quarter word of that, incarnation means God came and lived in our backyard so that we, from that moment on, would always know that he knows who we are, that he knows what we are capable of, that he knows about us intimately. Woodrow Wilson, you'll see a picture of him, he's the 28th president that we had, and if you know much about history, 1913 to about 1921. But one of the things you'll know about Woodrow Wilson is that he was really not well physically. He struggled physically and was unable to finish university studies for a while because of a bad break in his health. And a couple of things he said that has been recorded in history I find interesting. He says, how can a man with a weak body ever arrive anywhere? Now, there was a man who knew that he was not physically right, and that wore on him to the point that he had some loneliness, I'm sure, because of that. Matter of fact, the lady that he later married, he once said to her, he said, you're the only person with whom I do not have to act a part, to whom I do not have to deal out confidences cautiously. My salvation is in being loved. Now think about that. I do not think my salvation is in being loved by other people, but I do think and believe my salvation is tied to the fact that God has sought me out through Christ And because of that, he has given me the fullness of his grace, which allows me to love other people and them to, in fact, return that love to me. And that plays out in a grand way in our lives. So there's the smallness of greed, the largeness of grace. Now let's spend the rest of our time on the power of gratitude. This one is tough. I'll just be honest with you. I'm not naturally grateful. I'm married to somebody who is. She wakes up and has that about her. Look what the scripture says. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. What he's saying is that we are pushed and pulled by all kinds of power. All kinds of power push and pull at us. The strong power of ambition and greed pulls on us. But after a while, we recognize that it's a self-defeating option in our lives. Then there is the mystery of what we've been talking about. And the mystery of what we've been talking about is the mystery of grace and the mystery of gratitude. The mystery of acceptance that allows us to walk to a point where we are a grateful people. And I will tell you that there is incredible power in gratitude. If you're dragging one day, if you're just really feeling bombarded, things are weighing heavy on your shoulders, then try to think, what one thing am I grateful for right this minute? What one thing am I grateful for? Then wait another hour or two. Say, what one thing am I grateful for? Now, if you have to go back to the one you used before, go ahead. Go back to it. Because sometimes there will be those things where you can only find just a few of those kinds of things. But go back nonetheless and live that. So how did Zacchaeus do? Zacchaeus was a man erupting with gratitude. How do I know that? Well, Jesus knew that about him because Jesus was able to understand that his life had been committed to something that was called financial gain. The greedy became the grateful. Lloyd Douglas, you'll see a picture of him in just a moment, he interprets Zacchaeus' gratitude in this conversation. Interesting, as I was doing some research on Lloyd Douglas, who Lloyd Douglas, by the way, has written numerous historical biographies around the idea, the concept, the gospel of Jesus, the robe and some other ones. And I don't exactly remember where this one came from. I tried to look and couldn't find out. But what I did find out in the research is that his father was a pastor, guess where? Florence, Kentucky. Back years ago, his dad would pastor a church, a Lutheran church in Florence, Kentucky. But in one of his novels, he says, Zacchaeus, said the carpenter gently, what did you see that made you desire this peace? In other words, this peace, making this peace with the people. He said, good master, I saw mirrored in your eyes the face of Zacchaeus that I was meant to be. And I'll tell you, there were moments when Dan Francis was struggling with my faith, and it was up and down, up and down. I had lived a life that was very far from God. And so there were just moments when I looked into somebody's eyes and I was able to see their sense of gratitude and appreciation and acceptance of me that allowed me to see what I could become. And that made all the difference. Zacchaeus was a man erupting with gratitude, and he was a man full of grace. I think the two go together. I don't think you can be full of grace and not have gratitude. I don't think you can be full of grace and not be a grateful person who therefore is generous. Martin Luther, I liked it that somebody came to me after the service and asked me about this quote. Martin Luther said, there are 3 conversions. There's the conversion of the heart, there's the conversion of the mind, and then there's the conversion of the purse. And he's right, because when Christ gets a hold of us, he is Lord, and we don't own. We're just stewards, and so we begin living our lives in a way that's different. The reason we know this here, and the reason that Jesus talked so straight to Zacchaeus about his money, was the fact that money was obvious. I mean, I know plenty of wealthy people that money is not an issue for them. I mean, they do give a lot of it away. You know, do you know how much Warren Buffett gives away? I mean, like 90+%. Of course, you know, his 10% is not bad. But I will tell you also that Buffett still lives in the same house he's lived in for the last, 37, 40 years. which I find interesting. But there are three conversions. And here talks about if you were going to compensate voluntarily what was expected by a Jew back then, it would have been you give back the original amount that you cheated and you add 20% on that. But what did he do? He gave the compulsory restitution, and that is double the original by repaying 4 to 5 times the original. Now, he knew that something had happened to him, and he wanted to be grateful for that. Carl Menninger was a Christian psychiatrist who wrote the book, Whatever Happened to Sin, and you're going to see a copy of that book there. I've mentioned that book to you. It's one of the classics of all time. But Carl Menninger, as a Christian psychiatrist, regularly, obviously, was around people and did some counseling and that kind of thing, and he had an interesting conversation with a very, very, very wealthy man. He said, what do you do with all your money? And to which the man said, well, I just worry. And then he said, is there pleasure in worrying? And he said, no, but I feel terror when I think about giving it away. Now, there is a stinginess that is a sickness, and I think that's what Menninger's closing conclusion about that was that he's never known a generous person who was mentally ill. So, next time somebody calls you mentally ill, just be generous, okay? Just be generous. Give of your life. I don't mean that you would be called that. Thirdly, Zacchaeus was a kingdom man. I've often thought, I don't know, maybe I'm weird, but sometimes I sit around and think about what I might want on my tombstone, if I even have one, even I'm rethinking all that. Here lies a man, loved his wife, loved his kids, served God, and was a kingdom man. I mean, he was a kingdom man. You knew that at the end of the day, what mattered to him was being a kingdom person and how that would play out with them. Finally, actually two other pictures. How many have seen the play Oliver? It's a play on Oliver Twist. Many have seen that. There's a great question from the song that Fagin lives in, and that's the picture of Fagin who sings in this musical about his little gang of pickpockets that he's trained. And he sings near the end, this song says, can a man change, can a man change, can a man change? Well, he can. It's not easy, but they can. How about C.S. Lewis? He was a militant atheist, an Oxford teacher who God sneaked up on, and he called it what he wrote later, Surprised by Joy. And he was dragged kicking and screaming. John Wesley, who was a fanatical son of a minister who also became a missionary to America, had a great theological mind, but really floundered around until finally he had this moment with God at a chapel in England where he said his heart was strangely warmed, and he became the foundation of the Methodist Church. Bill Stringfellow, you won't know that name as well, but he was one of the best lawyers in his class at Yale Law School, and suddenly he was reading the Bible one day and decided, I'm going to give my life to the ministry in Harlan, New York, and there he spent the rest of his life. And how about Augustine? You've heard that name if you've been around church much. Augustine became a monk, but there was a little bit of problem with Augustine. Augustine was a monk with a mistress. Those things don't necessarily need to go together. I don't know if you're aware of that. But he was a monk with a mistress, and he struggled. And this is literally, if you read his book, The Confessions, this is what he said. Oh, Lord, make me pure, but not yet. He was waiting for another time when it would all work together. And yet, God touched him, and you know the rest of the story. He became St. Augustine. The beauty of our time today has been that we get to sense God's presence in a fresh way, to be a grateful people, and to be encouraged. I hope that's been the case for you.